two things you got to know about Wick. Wick's really smart, really, really smart, and Wick is a really nice guy. Wick he was hosting his own charity golf tournament, and he left after the 14th hole to come here. So thank you. And that is a man of his word who honors his commitments.
I wasn't playing that well. Look, if I was shooting under par, I'd still be
It's like I shot a 65. It's amazing. So with those two as a preamble, my first question I will ask you, as a Knicks season ticket holder for 20 years, will you please buy the Knicks?
Oh,
please.
I oftentimes actually, Randall, ask the room if there are any Knicks season ticket holders here. I mean, I literally do. You didn't know this, but are there any other Knicks fans here? It's okay to say it. I mean, it's just if you're born and raised. Anybody else? Oh, great. Well, that's really why I brought this, so you could see one in your lifetime. That's what they look like. So anyway,
I'm too young for Will Reed. It's just a myth that you could actually have.
This kind of dynamic is why sports is interesting to a lot of people, not everybody in the world, but just the visceral competitiveness of Knicks, Celtics, or anything else.
It's not really a rivalry. We're working on it, though. But, it might be a while.
You're working on it. You've turned it around. Maybe. It's good. It's good.
I hope.
But I want to start everything with a question I think that's on everybody. So I think today has been about, and I'm pretty sure this segment is supposed to be about how technology is changing areas, particularly, I think, in this case, sports, and that's all great, and we can talk about that. But I think technology has probably changed journalism, would be my guess. I'm just a consumer of journalism, not a journalist, but I'm going to put on the journalist hat, actually, if I could put on the journalist hat. And I'd like to ask you what it feels like to be the leading journalist in the world right now. You broke the story everybody was talking about yesterday, that Trump challenged his Secretary of State to an IQ test, and you spent an hour with Trump in the White House, and how many views, how did that story propagate?
There is a parallel of what I'd love to talk about with you, which is technology really is changing things. Where there was I was with the president on Friday for an hour, and wrote all weekend, and then Monday we sent it to the printer, sent our print magazine to the printer. But nowadays you can't. So it's the cover of our next issue, but you can't wait, especially in Trump world. I mean, like a day is like a month, right? I mean, an hour is a day, and everything. It's like dog years times 100. And
it seems that way. He seems like he's been in office for 10 years.
Yes, it does feel like 10 years. And so there's no doubt. In the old days, we would have taken that story, like we got a big Trump cover story and kind of inside Trump's head, and it's kind of a it's a psychological analysis based on, I've interviewed him a bunch of times, but this was a really deep dive in the Oval Office. And we, of course, put it up immediately Tuesday. It went up literally I went home from the office because I literally finished it. I wrote it Sunday. I took a day off on Saturday. I wrote it Sunday. We got it fact-checked, laid out. I went to bed. I left office about 2 or 3 in the morning. It publishes at 5:30 in the morning, and then at 7 in the morning on Morning Joe. And that is change. And that is, in the very kind introduction, Forbes' print readership is as high as it's ever been. The print readership, but that is fueled in part because we understand that every medium has to be true to itself. And so that means that story does not save. You put it up even though you're, quote unquote, cannibalizing your print magazine, but you're not. You're not, because what you're doing is literally 1 million people read it yesterday. And when they see it on the newsstand, they will remember they've read half of it or their friend told them about it. Right. And so that will actually increase the sales of the print magazine while being true to the journalism, which is you get that story out immediately because the world needs to know who's smarter, Trump or Tillerson.
You spent an hour with him, one-on-one. Mm-hmm. Do you feel better or worse than when you went in?
Ooh, that's such a good question. We should have been moderating all day here. Wow. I've interviewed him several times over the last 20 years. He was more on his game, actually, Friday than I've ever seen. He was on message relative. The whole transcript we put up, also that's another change with technology, and also with Trump, where it used to be, if you interviewed a president, interviewed a big CEO, you'd write a story and that would be it. But there's almost a civic responsibility we feel, and I think a lot of people have been doing is to put the whole transcript verbatim. And, especially with Trump, like every and is in there, like you don't, no fake news here, like they cut out an and or something. So the entire verbatim, and we just put it up so that people can go judge for themselves, and it's just, completely open kimono. So So, people can judge for themselves. They could see. But he was on message that said, every there's you have a choice when you talk to him. You can either fact check everything he says and kind of say, well, and you'll spend the whole time haggling about facts. Or I made it there were a couple points where I wanted to ask follow up, and you can again see it in the transcript. But there are a couple points where it's less important to kind of be the fact checker, because we could do that later, and more important to get him on the record with a bunch of stuff.
But Randall, I read the story carefully, and it is full of references to almost borderline pathological self-regard, or
right.
I don't know what it is,
yes.
or worried about how other insecurity,
yes,
I guess it is.
That's totally true.
I mean,
I'll tell you one quick story, and then we're going to talk only about you. That's the
I'm having
deal,
a great
right?
time. I'm having
Is
a great
this a
time.
deal? If I answer this question, are we done with me and go to you?
No,
is that a deal?
everybody's going to say no.
It's
We
a
like
deal. I'll tell you one true story about Trump and truth, and then we're done with this. Which is, I was with him a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, right before the New Hampshire primary. So it was fall, 2 years ago now, like October 2015, just when he was running this campaign. He was head in the polls, but it didn't really seem. It seemed like it was still a stunt, and did a cover story on it.
Still does.
Yes. And it happened that I happened to be with him. I dropped in, actually. I wasn't even supposed to, because that was, it was still kind of a stunt. I just dropped in. Over the course of a week, I saw him like 3 different times. I just dropped in Trump Tower because I was in the neighborhood, and I went up there, and it so happened that the Pope was in New York. That was when Pope Francis made his first visit to New York. And then the word was out, and the Pope mobile was parked right outside Trump Tower, literally, because he was having Mass in St. Patrick's, so those who know New York, right down Fifth Avenue. And I used to think the Pope drove around in the Pope mobile, they pick him up at the airport in the Pope mobile, but it turns out that that's kind of the show car. He's actually in a real, which probably makes sense. He's in a real bulletproof limo, and then near the site, they put him in the Pope mobile to wave to people. And so he was actually, the motorcade was coming up right under Trump Tower and going to transfer the Pope into the Pope mobile. And so the word's out, the Pope's here. And so Trump goes, Randall, you want to see the Pope? I'm like, yeah, I want to see the Pope. Let's go see that. That's cool. And so we went down in his office, his campaign headquarters on the 4th floor of Trump Tower with an outdoor ledge right above the Pope. I have pictures if anyone wants to see later, right above the Pope mobile. And so we go out there, and he's like, look, see, I told you it's the best building in America, right? I'm like, you're right, it's pretty good. And the Pope, and so we're waiting for the Pope, and all of a sudden we hear this noise. That I was like this rumbling noise. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized they're all looking at us. And it's like, oh yeah, he's really famous. He's really, really famous. And they were all looking at us, and they were booing, and then booing and booing. And I'm like, well, why are they booing? They see him and booing. And then I realized because earlier they've been chanting, Francisco. I'm like, and I asked somebody, what's Francisco? It's like, oh, it's Francis, Spanish. Because who's lined up 10 deep to see the Pope for hours and hours and hours on a cold fall day? It's Latinos. It's all the new immigrants in here. Because the Italians and the Irish, they're in St. Patrick's. They got the seats because they put in their 50 years of and they're now the establishment. And 50 years from now, these guys out there, their kids will be in St. Patrick's. But right now, they're lined up 10 deep. And that was right after the whole Mexican rape, so they see him, he gets booed. And he turns to me, and he goes, Randall, he goes, 90% cheers. He goes, and I would kill for that in the election, 90%. And I'm like thinking to myself, wow. I was so shocked that I didn't even say anything back. Because I was like, well, maybe they were cheering, right? Because he looked at me, and there's no way he was preparing for the Pope to show up.
If his name was Lou... Pinella, Lou Merloni.
Right, Donald.
Right.
But what struck me on this, and then I'll end this, is that there's no way he knew that I was going to show up, that the Pope was going to be there, and then he was going to get booed by a bunch of, No. So that there's one thing, all politicians will tell you something, and they'll spin it. But for him to hear this and instantly look to me, and it's blue, and he looked at me and says, green.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. And then I went home because I was taping it. because I was like, well, maybe they were cheering. And then I listened back, no, they were booing him. And the riddle is...
Well, you answered the question.
The riddle is, no, it's, was he reflexively lying, or did he hear the cheers?
Yeah.
And y'all answer that yourself later tonight. That's what I'll tell you.
Which one's better? Tough call.
That is a tough call.
Okay.
All right. Going back to my original question.
Those were 90% cheering.
I heard boos. Going back to you've bought and you've done an amazing job taking you've taken a franchise where you had no business owning an NBA team. Well, so the first question...
I never had an employee in my life. I had one assistant, Wendy Cooper.
My first question, how did you... Because you are a new... we're talking about technology, and you are you're a smart guy, and you're taking a lot of... you're taking analytics, and you're taking a lot of the kind of strategies that when you invested in companies, and you're applying it to sports. I mean, what made you, first of all, how did you pull off buying the Celtics?
It had really nothing to do with numbers, although I have an MBA. It had nothing to do with money, although I didn't have that much money. I still really don't.
You're asset rich.
I don't know what I am. I'm a happy guy, but I'm very lucky. But it's really never been about those things. Not to mean to be bragging or any of that stuff. Just saying it was totally about. I won a rowing championship in college, and then I went through 20 years with my son, Campbell, for 10 of those years, who's blind, and with some special needs, primarily blindness, and we went through together, a long road of, and by the way, today is Campbell's 25th birthday. He's got his own independent apartment in Kendall Square, 2 great roommates, and a paying job at the Boys and Girls Club as a music teacher, and he's the happiest guy in the world, but it's been a long journey for him. He's done a great job, but I came out at about age 10, I finally realized he's probably going to be okay, knock on wood, like a happy person. And I was able to think about what I really wanted to do, and I looked at a picture on the wall of a rowing thing or something, probably, and just said, I want to go win a championship. So I bought control of the Celtics for the reason of trying to put banner 17 up in the rafters. And so I guess the answer, how did I do it, is there was it was a publicly traded company. It was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So I think literally anybody could have gone down and found the owner who was in New York, hadn't been to Boston in 4 years. But I went and found him, and I said, would you possibly sell me the Celtics? And he said, well, it's not for sale. Well, is there a number? Well, I suppose there's a crazy number. Well, what's the crazy number? And he named the crazy number, and I had done the math on that number. I thought it was going to be around that number. I had done that math on that number for like 30 minutes. It was $360 million. The team was making 19 or 20 million of cash if you added up, did some work on the financial statements. And so no one's going to pay, 18 times EBITDA. You should pay 12 or maybe 8. And it was a slow growth team, but he wanted 18 times. But I thought of it a different way, which was I could borrow 180 million against the team for 6% at the time. So I needed to raise 180 or maybe as much as 190, 200 million around Boston. And so 6% times 180 is 11 million or so of interest. So I had 20 million of cash flow, 11 million of interest payments. So I had a little bit of a cushion to be a first-time CEO and invest a little bit more in players in the team. I wanted to run it hot. I wanted to run it and invest in the team, not run it cheaply or thinly or losing games. I wanted to win games and win a banner. And then so that meant I had to raise 200 million of equity around Boston from a bunch of people who would accept no dividends and say, all right, no dividends, that's fine, let's just go win. And so the key thing was, can I do that? Because I didn't have that money. So I put down everything liquid that I had, plus mortgage my house to just do the deposit on the team, and I took 3 months to raise the 360 million. Lost 17 pounds.
Was it a refundable deposit?
No, not a refundable deposit.
So you were all in.
Well, I wasn't, because I probably had other assets. My family has done well, but it was a big deal.
Yeah,
I know I would have been pretty embarrassed, and I would have missed the money. I lost 17 pounds. I didn't miss them. I haven't gotten them all back. I got a few back, but I guess I like to say if I'd gone.
Stress is the best diet, for the record.
If I'd gone to Harvard Business School, probably still be running the numbers. But I went to Stanford Business School, so I just did the deal. I just did the deal. So it was a great deal. But the thing that's changed, that it's turned out to be a great financial deal, which I didn't predict. I told my partners that the key was, this is the last Boston team that is going to sell in our lifetimes. So if you think about that statement, makes it seem like a sort of a rare asset. And that may be a decent prediction. So far, 15 years in, we're right.
Yep.
And then I said, look, we're overpaying a bit. This is a record price. We don't own the arena. This is just a team with a lease, But I think we'll get back 0.8 of our money if it goes downside, and we'll get 2 or 3x in the long, long run if it goes super well, but we're going to have the time of our lives. So what I was selling to myself and to them was the time of your lives. This will be the time of your life. You can't put a price on it. It is enjoyment. When you're 85 years old, you look back, you say, look, we put a banner up in the rafters, hopefully 2 or 3, and we help 1,000 charities a year with the Celtics, and it's bigger than ourselves. We can pass it on to other people. We're just trustees. We don't really own it. I don't own the Celtics. I am the head trustee of the Celtics that we all own, in a way. And so it's a great thing to be involved in. And so that's not 12 times or 18 times. That's just if you have the money to do it, just do it, And so that's how. But what's changed it and what's made the value actually much higher than those numbers, luckily, was technology. So
TiVo.
The team started with, the more broadcast channels there are competing, the more live content that can aggregate audiences.
Also skipping commercials.
I mean, and skipping commercials, but they don't skip them for us. In fact, we just charge.
If you're watching live, you're going to actually have to watch the commercials. Or think about a show that's not live sports, but last time you watched the commercial.
Right. And so, what would Hershey's, who was just up here, I haven't gotten a chance to speak to her, and I don't want to put her on the spot, but I'm sure they may have looked at, doing one of the jersey patches because, people will be seeing that logo. So ours is with General Electric. What an amazing company to bring. What a great brand. At the press conference, I said, wow, Thomas Edison, meet Larry Bird. I mean, this is like the two, iconic, Bill Russell. So it's just technology has changed it. The values have accelerated. It's been the time of my life, and I feel very lucky.
In your era, you built 2 great teams. I mean, you built the championship team, and then now you've rebuilt another juggernaut. I mean, so how have you taken the Stanford MBA VC tech-driven mindset? I mean, there's something to that because you're doing something right. Trust me, as a Knicks fan, I know.
Well, we have some ups and downs. We've had some ups and downs.
Of course. Nothing in a straight line. But you guys clearly know what you're doing because you can't. This is not a lucky break.
I've not been ever interested in anything other than winning a championship, and we did luckily do that in 2008. The car I drove here today from the golf has a license plate. Celtics, we have Celtics license plates if you want one, and this particular one says Celtics 39. The reason it's got 39 on the plate is because we won the championship by 39 points in 2008. So who's counting? If you're going to win it in style. But Jim Collins was at your Forbes 100 Greatest Minds thing. He was a great professor at Stanford Business School and the author of Good to Great and Built to Last and many other great books. But he's the one that first really put in my mind, go for it. Go for a big, hairy, aggressive goal is what he called it. And I thanked him when I saw him the other night at your event for putting that in my mind. And so I wanted to only do banners. And so if you're going to only do banners, then it's binary. You're either almost getting there or you're nowhere, right? So if you're nowhere, don't be impatient. So patience is the key. Don't graft in mid-level, middle-aged players. I think you're allowed to be ageist in pro sports. Anyway, don't graft in people in the middle of their careers at high prices because you think the fans won't put up with a mediocre season. What we did in 2003, 2004 is we brought in Danny Ainge, and said, we want to win the thing. And we studied the last 25 years using technology, using data science back in 2003. Last 25 years of NBA championships. And 24 of those 25 teams, when you tease out the data, which I had to employ people to do for me.
So you have your own Moneyball nerd
We've got now 8 full-time Moneyball nerds. We had 2 at the time. And 24 of those 25 teams had 3 All-Stars at once on the floor. Nobody really knew that because the All-Stars were sort of cloaked. One was the year before maybe or 2 years after, but there were 3 All-Star quality guys. And the important observation was that in each case, 24 years almost in a row, but for one season, the central figure was a top 50 all-time player. I figure everybody in this room, if you're sitting here, you are a championship level, contender or player. I mean, this room is a collection of people who achieve and have energy and have, potential and have achieved a lot of that potential. But so my only thought now that I'm in my 50s, feel like I'm almost the oldest person in the room, is to say, What banners do you want to hang when you're 80, 85, 90? What do you want to look up and see in the rafters? You could say you did something about cancer, or something about hunger, or you were a great mom or dad, or you just made the world a better place somehow. Think of that banner and make a plan to raise it up.